how do you value traditions but embrace new ideas at the same time? Because working with my dad, there's a lot of traditions that we do and we do well, or just my family in general. Like, we have the tradition of memory preservation. And so I want to continue that.
Well, I'm trying to make this as like I I don't want to just try to copy Joe Rogan, but I hear so many podcasts with just professionals or like industry leaders all the time, and so I'm trying to make this not that, just because it's like, okay, there's about 1,000 podcasts out there of professionals talking, so I'm trying to make this much more like on the ground, people who actually just do the work every day and focus more on the stories of people, just because I think our world needs more of that. I'm kind of sick of listening to experts all the time. So,
I appreciate that. I listen to many hours of podcast, and it is fun to hear, the professionals talk and share their insights, but it's also really fun to hear quote unquote normal people, the everyday people, tell their stories, because that's what my life is going to be a little bit closer to realistically than
mhm.
people with big titles, things like that.
Sweet. Well, then why don't you just introduce yourself then?
I am Hannah Borg. I'm a sixth generation farmer from Northeast Nebraska. And on our farm, we have crops, cattle, and chickens. And I used to say most recently chickens. I guess that's still true. But we've now been in the chicken business for 5 years. So I don't know how long the new title lasts. But crops, corn and soybeans, alfalfa, cattle, we have 1,000 head feedlot and some cows. And then chickens, we have 60,000 chickens for Costco.
60,000 chickens. How much work was it to get like all the coops and everything set up for 60,000? I like know nothing about chicken farming.
That's okay, because I didn't either. The first day that I'd ever been in a chicken barn was the day that we got chickens. Uh, so call us crazy. 2019 or 18, somewhere around there, that's when the process started. Or in 2018, the process started, and we built the barns. It took maybe a year. And the barns are 60 by 600 feet long, and we have two of those big ones and then a half one. So in the chicken industry, 60,000 isn't that big a number, but to you and me, it is a big number. Um, so we raise pullets, which are the hens that will eventually lay the eggs. So our cycle is we get birds when they're a day old, we have them for 5 months. We raise them to about 5 pounds, and then they go to another farm where they lay eggs. And those eggs go to Fremont. Bear with me, this is a whole process. Those eggs go to Fremont, which is in east central Nebraska. They're hatched there. Then they go out to broiler farms and they get about 6 pounds in 6 weeks. Then those broilers, those finished birds, we would know them as like fat steers in cattle terms.
Mm-hmm.
They go back to Fremont and they're processing about 1 million birds a week in Fremont. And then they go to Costco's all along the western United States. So Costco said to themselves they wanted to control their supply chain of that $5 chicken that you
Mm-hmm.
get at the back of the store. And so they landed in eastern Nebraska. So, yeah, they're fully integrated. Nebraska's not known as a chicken state,
Mm-hmm.
but it was a really good addition to us because it was a way for my parents to expand and diversify. And oh, by the way, bring a kid back home. And that was me. I was first in line. I was old enough. I came home the Tuesday. We got our first batch of chickens the Tuesday of my senior year finals week in college, which was
Wow.
crazy. Yeah. So that was a lot. That was a lot of information there in a short amount of time. But that's the overview of the chicken business. How did we get into it? We just happened to know someone that was involved in the process, and my parents are crazy enough to be an out of the box thinker and chose that chickens was a good way to expand and diversify for us.
So Costco manages the whole supply chain for that. So they basically just hire you guys out to take care of the chickens. Okay.
Yes, so it's Lincoln Premium Poultry is our contracting company, but it's in partnership with Costco, or it's only Costco. It's easier for me to say Costco versus LPP. Sometimes I use them interchangeably. So LPP owns our birds. and we own the barns and the equipment.
Got it.
So we're new to integrate, like being integrator farmers. So it's a partnership.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting, on our feedlot side, every we have control in every aspect and every decision.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas on the chicken side, our management is for the equipment and barns versus the animals. Like they're the ones telling us when we're vaccinating, our
Mm-hmm.
shipping, like all those details comes from them, and there's pros and cons of that. But our main, we carry out the daily operations of
Yeah. Yeah.
walking, or I do, walking the barns, taking care of things, that kind of thing.
Hmm. Yeah. Interesting. Do you guys have a lot of pork and hogs out there? Because I know that's traditionally how the hog model works. At least for all the
Hmm.
guys around here, most guys own the barns, and then pretty much most, even a lot of them now, just have the management company come and check the barns daily. So there's guys, specifically Iowa Select Farms is a big one around here. They'll be driving around in their wrapped pickups, and they'll just be stopping at barn after barn after barn all day checking animals. And so, but interesting. You said you guys have a feedlot too?
Yes, we have about 1,000 head in our feedlot. We own them. We background them, and so we get them in as wean calves in the fall, about the 600, 550 to 600 pounds. Then we feed them to 1,000 pounds, and then we ship them to another feedlot in Cumming County, which is south of us, which is feedlot capital of Nebraska, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And they finish them there, and so then we have more turnover in our feedlot, and then we specialize in backgrounding, and then we essentially have someone else custom feed our cattle, so because they specialize in finishing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I my favorite thing in the whole world is wean calves, which is not a lot of people would say, I guess. But that's what we found is our niche, as something that we're really good at because we are smaller. It's my brother, dad, and I, mostly my brother and I. We can keep really close eyes on those wean calves and really create healthy calves because we're so close to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then yep, about 1,000 pounds they go down to another feedlot. So we got all our calves in kind of earlier this year, September, and we're about ready to start the cycle of re-implanting everything and then shipping them out to another feedlot, and then we'll start getting in yearlings, mid late winter, early spring.
Hmm. So you bring in yearlings typically. So it's
Yeah.
you guys don't do the cow calf pair operation. You take the freshly weaned cows and then transition them. Is that what I'm hearing?
So we do have a few cows. My brother and I do, mostly my brother. He manages that herd. So we do calve a few cows out, but not enough to fill our feedlot.
Yeah.
Um, but we fill our feedlot full of weaned calves in the fall, and then once
Mm-hmm.
we ship them out, we got to fill it again. And so we buy a little bit bigger calves. So we turn over our feedlot two, 3 times a year, depending on things. Like last year, we finished everything that we owned, which was kind of unique for us. It just made sense how the markets were for us to pay ourselves to finish our cattle versus someone else finishing them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but this year, I think we'll ship them out and have someone else finish them. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like a decision's made and then things change, and sometimes I'm not always updated on those decisions. But as of
Mm-hmm.
now, I don't think we'll finish as many cattle as what we did at our feedlot this year as what we did last year.
Hmm. Interesting. Where do you guys typically buy your, like, if you're bringing cows in from someone else? Where are you typically buying those from?
All of them come from South Dakota or Montana. This last fall, they all came from Montana, and so they have sometimes a 12-hour drive to get to our
Yeah.
place. And so when we receive calves, we keep a really close eye on them because after 2 days is kind of when some sickness shows up, if that's going to happen. Yeah, some years more of them come from South Dakota. It just depends on where our order buyer's at, drought conditions. There's just a lot of factors. But South Dakota, Montana, every once in a while we might fill in a small group with some Nebraska calves, but
Mm-hmm.
the cow calf herd is out, west of us. We're in corn
Yeah.
and cattle country, or
Yeah.
we're not in cow country here, so it works for us to bring cattle from the western states.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. What do you guys use to like track Like, what do you guys use to track all the animals coming through? That sounds like a lot of animals and things to keep track of. What do you guys like? I just know when because I used to farm. We had, we were mostly corn and soybeans, but there was probably about 100 head of cattle that we still somehow managed to take care of. It wasn't a great idea, but like it was still like the guy I worked for, Tyler. It was pretty much all in his head or on a notepad. It was like, okay, how the heck? I was like working for him. I was like, I don't know these cows' names. I don't know what's going on. Like, how do you guys keep track of all that?
Yeah, that's definitely a pain point. When my brother and I started to become more involved, it's a slow transition, right? So our old way of feeding animals was all in my dad's head, truly. Like
Mm-hmm.
he knew like what pen, what ration, how many days they've been on that. And then when I first started doing chores, this is a long answer to answering your question.
It's
But
okay.
when I first started to do chores, it was just during like planting and harvest when my dad was in the field. And so every day I'd have to call him and say, hey, what are the rations or what are the amounts for today? These are what the bunks looks like. And then he would ramble off numbers. I would write them down, and then I would have to check the sheet. It was a cluster, right?
Literally, whenever we, sorry to interrupt you, whenever we would, like, I was in charge of morning
Mm-hmm.
chores during harvest, so I was like, I would just drive over and I would go to the feed bunks and I'd have to mix the feed and everything. Every single morning, it was like, all right, let me call Tyler to ask what he wants today, or like, what's the feed ration for the day. I was like, every single day, I was like, it's like, man, it'd be really handy if we just had like a
Yeah,
schedule or like we could learn. And I was like, love Tyler to death. I was just like, oh, this is a
it was a
lot. How do you keep
pain
track of all
point,
this in your
right?
head?
And
Yeah.
I bet some days when you called him, it was really inconvenient for you to call him because in my case, sometimes I'd call my dad and something's broke down or he's unloading, like he didn't have the attention to give to me to ramble off the numbers. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a pain point. So how we solved that was we used Performance Beef, which is actually based out of Iowa. And they were created for feedlots like ours, smaller feedlots, and so we keep track of all of our feed, all of our inventory, everything is through that. And it is truly a game changer. Let me tell you, it's way easier to track yards individually versus when mom and dad were just mom and dad with their cattle. It's easier to keep everything in one pot, right? Like these are all of
Mm-hmm.
our cattle, these are all the expenses, like everything's in and out of one spot. But when my brother, so it's my brother, sister, and I, when we started having cattle in the feedlot, we had smaller groups. And so we had it, it was just a pain point, right? So Performance Beef
Mm-hmm.
solved all that for us. And there, I sound like an advertisement, but I really I'm not. It's just I highly recommend it because sometimes I'm doing chores, sometimes it's my brother doing chores, and so we can check on things. We can keep track of the financial things. The next step
Mm-hmm.
is to put a scale on our chute, and then we can also have a tag that keeps, when they come into the chute, it weighs them. There's just so many advantages to that. So Performance Beef solved that pain point for us, and I no longer. I got fed up with calling my dad and asking for the numbers like what you had to for Tyler, and it's just been an absolute game changer for us.
That's sweet. So what so you mentioned that pain point with your dad, and you mentioned, now you guys have kind of taken over. How does that like transition look? Because I know like probably like I would say most farms I'd probably say 75% of my friends who either work on farms or are taking over the farm, there's typically that sort of parent child dynamic when it comes to like transitioning and starting to do things. Like, how have you guys navigated that? And like also like what made you want to come back in the first place? Well, like what part of you is like, this is something I want to keep doing for the rest of my life, like like those are big decisions that more and more, it's the stereotypical numbers that but like less kids are returning home to
Mhm.
the farm every year. It's like it's a well-known thing. I'm not going to go on about it, but like how did you come to the determination that you weren't going to be one of those kids, and like how have you navigated that conversation with your parents?
How long do we have? Uh, it's a lot to answer. So initially, I talked about, we have the chicken barns for Costco. So I'm lucky enough to come to from a family that is pretty forward thinking. that didn't start with my dad. I saw my grandpa be forward thinking. My Another layer of complexity to our farm is my dad farms with his three brothers, so we're
Mm.
four families that we farm together on the equipment side. So my grandpa is a forward thinker because my grandpa somehow managed to have all of his four sons back home farming with him. And so my dad, when he started farming and just how we were raised with a mindset of this is a family farm. It's a blessing to be here, but you got to work for it as well. So when I went off to college, I went to University of Nebraska Lincoln and I studied agricultural communications. I was headed down the route of working probably for a commodity association or some sort of in the industry doing communications. And
Mhm.
when I came home from college, I, came home a little homesick sometimes and I went to my grandma's home and I would spend time with her. And I ended up realizing we have a whole library of family history documented, not only through written stories, but also photographs. And all these photographs are date and detailed and it has the people in it. Like when I say a library, a huge library. So I started to go through these photos. We have 100 years of history worth of 100 plus years worth of history documented. And so I started going through these and it's like, holy moly, I'm seeing my great grandpa, with the first tractor on the farm and hearing the stories of my grandma and grandpa, the first 10 cattle that they bought when they got married. Like I'm seeing the beginning of the farm generations ago to what we have now. And that grew inside of me of like, this is something important to us. This has value to it. And I want to be a part of this legacy that Borg Family Farms is. And so that was brewing in my brain. When I went to college, I left with the intention that I probably wouldn't be able to come home to the farm for a while. So that wasn't necessarily high on the top of dreams because I just knew the reality of probably won't work to come home to the farm. But when my parents made that crazy decision to raise chickens, like who the heck are we? We're cattle and crop people. Like we know nothing about chickens. We didn't even have backyard chickens. So it was a really crazy
Mhm.
decision. My dad came to me and said, "Hey, do you want a job?" And generally that means like go down to the mailbox and pick up mail, or like he kind of hyped up some random jobs like, do you want a job? But when he said like, hey, do you want a job on the farm? I was able to say yes because I knew what the farm meant to me.
Mm.
um, and I didn't know what I was saying yes to, because turns out coming home to the family business is so hard. And I'm not just saying that as an individual, but I have talked to a lot of peers that have transitioned home and it's tough. I don't know what your experience is of talking to people, but there's a lot of transition into college, right?
Mhm.
You spend your whole senior year of high school, like the hype of going to college. You have your dorm bedding picked out. You have all your classes. You have all these small details, and that transition, and it's still a big thing, but it's pretty easy to transition into college, or at least that was my experience. But that transition out of college in general is pretty rowdy because you go from being in school your whole life and being with peers and kind of in that same routine as the people around you to all of a sudden you might not see your best friend from college for 6 months or a year, that kind of thing. So the transition out of college is pretty gnarly to begin with. And
Mhm.
then, oh, by the way, I'm going home to the family business. That's pretty rowdy too. And oh, by the way, we're starting a brand new business that we have no experience in. And oh, by the way, we're working with a company that is also starting. They have no experience. Mix all those factors together, and I don't remember my first year at home because it was so hard. It was so hard. It was truly, we were in survival mode because we have these chickens and all this equipment. The equipment, we came in with the assumption that brand new equipment works. Well, that's not the case. I never want to have brand new equipment again. It takes a long time to get things adjusted, and it's one thing to know how to run it, but to fix it and then maintain it, that's a whole cycle of learning too.
Mhm.
And then we have the normal farm stuff, the seasonal work. And then, oh, we got to figure out, we know how to run our chicken barns in the summer, but it's way different running the chicken barns in the winter. So it really truly took Oh, one more layer to that. Finding a house to live in is hard in a small community. So then I'm living with my parents. So I'm transitioning out of college at the same time I'm working in the family business. At the same time, starting a new business, and it's just an absolute cluster. So it really took me, I, I swear, probably 2 years to really like take a breath of like, oh, holy moly, we have gone through all the cycles twice, and we kind of have a handle on how to do things. It's a really isolating process, though. It's just there's a lot of loneliness in it. And now, almost 5 years in, I can look back and say, like, wow, that was really, really tough. And I'm glad I don't ever have to do that again.
Hmm. How did you like in the moment handle all the stress and the chaos? Like how do you and your brothers handle that? How did you and your like parents handle that? Like what was like what kept you guys like, "Oh, this is worth it. We should keep going. We should keep doing this." Like you guys clearly didn't throw in the towel. Like what was your guys' mindset like going through that?
I think conversations just like that happen of just talking to each other like, this is really hard. This is really hard to start a new business. This is really hard to work together as a family. This is really hard to live together. But this is a choice that we're making. Like that is a hard that we choose. And we knew that it would get better with time, and it definitely has. But now, like, we're in January now, and so it's kind of a slower season of winter. There's still plenty of things to do, don't get me wrong, but the fall, we were just in the fall season not that long ago, and the fall harvest just drags on, and it's so just emotionally tough. There's just a lot of things to juggle, and I came out of it pretty beaten up emotionally because everyone just patience is short. You say things that maybe you don't mean. You're tired of things breaking down, and when small things happen they feel big. And I just felt, we all felt pretty beat up emotionally at the end of the season. And then you kind of talk about things of, wow, that was tough. Let's, how can we do that better? And then you kind of get a break from each other, and you're like, okay, we're doing better. And then all of a sudden, on Christmas Day we're spending time together, and it's like we're still family. Like, we can still do
Mhm.
this. We're doing we're choosing this hard on purpose. We're choosing to have tough conversations because it matters to us. I have struggled working or talking, communicating with my dad. Um, but well, my brother has too. Struggle communicating with my brother sometimes. My brother and dad struggle communicating. That's not something new,
Mhm.
that no one else struggles with. But just learning how to have hard conversations of like, hey, I didn't like how that went.
Mhm.
um, I like, for example, I was doing chores one morning, Saturday morning, and it was dark out. I think it was just the time change had just happened, and so we I hadn't adjusted to the new time change in terms of like, oh, I need to start chores a little bit later now because it's still dark out. So it was dark, and I backed underneath an auger and I hit it. And it was not a matter of skill. Like, I back underneath this auger every day, but I didn't realize I couldn't see it until I hit it. So,
Mhm.
anyways, I created a really big issue. And how we handled that together was not great. It was like, oh, you were not happy. I did not like, just no part of it went well.
Mhm.
Um, and I had to have the courage to bring up, like, hey, I think we could have handled this situation better. And those are hard, awkward conversations to have, but I'm willing to have them because I want to make this work, right? I think a lot of times just knowing how people operate on their operations sometimes, like, it's really easy to skip those hard conversations. It's really easy to like, oh, we'll just deal with it later. And
Mhm.
then eventually, like, things build up. And then something small happens, and then there's a big blow up, and you're like, wait, that wasn't that big a deal. And so just making sure that we're having conversations before those big blow ups is something that we've had to learn, is like, we got to be on the same page, so we are like mitigating the risk of those big blows, because no part of us want that to happen.
Sheesh. Yeah. I mean, that's bold of you to even be willing to say stuff like that, because you're right, that's not, those aren't conversations very, it's like, hey, I know it doesn't feel like we should be having a quick little family therapy session, but we probably should, like those are hard conversations to have, especially, yeah, that's, yeah.
And it's not easy. Like I talk to a lot of friends, um, or I have a lot of friends that work in their family operation as well. And those conversations are so hard for everyone because if you're in a professional setting, there's kind of an upline that you report to, right? I have friends that are teachers in school. And so if they have an issue, they go to the principal or it goes to the superintendent. Like there's kind of that chain of command. But in small family businesses or in small businesses in general, there's not really that chain of command, other than like oftentimes my mom serves as the HR department. Well, when my mom's getting multiple stories from everyone, that's not great because that means that we're not talking to each other. And so I've had to learn to say, like, I can vent to my mom because she's my mom, but I need to talk to my boss. It's also a weird thing, like when your dad's your boss, your brother, like we all kind of have our own things that we're in charge of. So
Hmm.
sometimes my mom's the boss, sometimes my dad's the boss, sometimes my brother's the boss, sometimes I'm the boss, sometimes like it's just a weird thing. And so embracing those uncomfortable conversations instead of just going to mom all the time, like dad said this or my brother did this, like just calling them out. Like my brother, I was having kind of an issue with him and I addressed it and I was like, "Hey, I don't really like how you're talking to me in some of these instances." Like instead of just saying, "Hey, I don't like this," I've also learned to give feedback of like, "Hey, I would prefer you would talk to me like this." And so when it happens again, I can say like, "Hey, you know how I feel about this. Please talk to me like this." And I'm talking kind of broadly because it's just easier to. Um, but all that to say is like I've learned how to have uncomfortable conversations and it's helped, right? It's
Hmm.
helped because I want our relationships to be strong, not only like in a business aspect, but a family. We value family. We can get together on New Year's Eve and have a game night and feel good about it.
Hmm.
We can also work cattle together and feel good about it. So it's a very purpose intentional filled conversations happen quite often.
Hmm. That's awesome. How does your family typically respond well to that?
Yeah. Yes and no. I don't know how to answer that. I feel like my mindset has shifted recently, so some of this stuff is kind of new of like feeling comfortable giving feedback of like, "Hey, I don't like when you blow up like that. That solves no problems that we're having. So, if you're going to blow up, I will walk away and knowing that I can because it's like I don't deserve to be treated like this in this situation." And so I've recently shifted like I will walk away. Um and they know that I mean that. So it's like if you want me to help, or if I want your help, like let's just talk about it. Like let's treat each other as as professionals, right? It's really easy when we're working as family to just treat each other like family, but we're also a business. We got to treat each other like professionals sometimes too. And so I think the response we have been getting better. We're not perfect, right? I'm painting a really nice picture that we have it figured out. We don't all the time,
Hmm.
but the wheels are turning in a way that feels like we have it working better than what it has been.
Yeah. Well, that's, yeah. I mean, it's never going to be perfect, but like just at least working towards somewhat of a similar direction, I think is hopefully helpful. That's sweet. So
Yeah,
where
for
do you
sure.
guys like see your farm? Like, do you guys like, because you are a family, like, do you talk about what the farm's going to look like in a couple years or down the road, or like, what's the vision? You're a family, but you're also a business. So like, what are you guys thinking as a family and a business? Like, hey, where are we going in the next 5 years? Where are we going in the next 10 years? Like, this farm's got to continue to survive to support all of us. So how the heck are we going to do that? Do you guys have conversations like that?
Yeah, those are interesting conversations to have because not only do we just want to survive, we want to thrive, right? So my dad has a different idea of what that looks like than my brother and what I do. And then my sister, who is married, they work on another farming operation, but how do they factor into our farm? We all have different ideas. And so sometimes it comes to, a smaller, depending on the size of decision, like buying a new piece of equipment. We needed a bigger tractor a bigger tractor so I could plant beans with recently. And so three of us had three different decisions on what kind of tractor to buy. Ultimately, my dad has purchasing power, but that's a lot of conversations leading up to that purchase of like what's going to fit us because where do we see ourselves going? And so I don't know if we have conversations of like in 5 years we want to look like this, because sometimes those visions are unattainable until you step back and make smaller decisions, right? So a smaller decision that we made this last year was my dad bought a side dump. And so now in the moment, it's like, what do we need a side dump for? But now we use it all the time. And so he had a vision that I didn't necessarily see. And sometimes like with performance beef, what we started out talking about, I brought that and I said, we need to get this. And my dad didn't really understand that decision at the beginning, but now he's like, we can't live without it. And so trusting each other's small decision that is going to make a difference in the bigger picture is really important. And so it's hard. I don't know how other people in their farming operations feel. It's hard to make visions for 5 years because what if we have another drought or what if we have a really good year? Like, I think for a little bit, yes, of course, you need to have a vision of which way you're pointing, but setting those goals in 5 years or 10 years, this is what it's going to look like. I guess we don't operate that way. It's more so like,
Mm.
how can we become more efficient or what is working right now? What is not working? A lot of those are solved through equipment purchases, sometimes buying cattle, things like that. And so I think we are really good at having conversations about what's impacting us in the small term, and how does that point us in the direction for things that we want later on.
Wow, that's a really good mindset to have. I like that. I don't. I run my own business, and so I'm always thinking like, all right, 5 years. What are the goals I need to set? You know, this year, what's the end goal? It's like running lean and thinking is like, hey, what do we actually need? And that's something I need to need to get back from my farm days, but just like thinking like what do I actually need? What do I
Mm-hmm.
want? And what is going to help me either have more time, spend less money doing it, be more efficient, deliver, like those are things like I don't have to think about a drought in my line of work. I do. I mean, I sort of do, but I have to,
Kind of.
I have to think about, okay, I just need to make sure that if the economy goes under, I can figure something out. Like that's like, the rest is, easy decision making. I don't have to think about. It's like, oh man, do I have 100 years riding on 100 years of
Mhm.
family legacy riding on these big decisions I got to make or the little decisions. So
Do you ever, when you plan those, your outlook for the next 3 to 5 years, do you ever feel overwhelmed? Like those are big goals, or do you feel like you have a good handle? Like, okay, I made this big goal. These are the steps I have to like reverse engineer to make that happen.
my wife tells me I dream too big pretty much every time I make some sort of goal or vision. But I'll always shoot high, being okay with not reaching that goal. I think that's something that helps me. It's like, you know what, I want to achieve this, but if I achieve 25 to 30% less than that, that's still a really good outcome. I want to have that mindset. It's like, you know what, I want to dream big and be able to take, dream big, but be able to take the punches when they don't happen. And so I think I set high goals because it encourages me when I do reverse engineer my steps of like, you know what, this is what's the bare minimum that I need to reach. Here's what I would really like to strive for. And some days I don't have that like extra energy to like strive for the absolute highest, but I know like, hey, here's my baseline that I want to reach to help me, you know, at least reach a lower tier goal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think opposite of that. I think more of like what's the next right step that feels good. Recently I made a decision like that was had nothing to do with a 5 year goal, but it was like the next right step for me. I essentially emailed someone out of the blue and said, "Hey, I want to work for you," and it worked out, and it felt like the next right step. I have no idea where it's going to take me. And so I reached out to Vance Crow. He's the founder of Legacy Interviews, and Legacy Interviews is a business that records high level video of people telling their legacy story. And he interviews them through the process. And so I knew going or the last couple years of winter, I've been kind of maybe not the most intentional with my time. Some days the only thing that I feel like we get done is chores, and then we don't have a heated shop, and so it's like, okay, what do we do with the rest of the day? Not saying like I just sit around and don't do things, but winter is just it's a slower pace.
Hmm.
And so I wanted to be more intentional. And so yeah, I sent him an email this fall and I was like, "Hey, winters are slow. Like I want to be more intentional with my time. Can I work for you?" And it lines up with my story earlier. Like I really love family legacies and preserving that. Like I call myself like a chief memory officer because I love taking photos and things like that. And how can I do that through slower seasons? And so that was the next right step. And I had no idea how that lines up with, my 5-year goals. But I think he calls me the chief client experiential officer. I can't remember exactly what it's called, um, but it's a way for people to preserve their personal legacy. And so, yeah, just going back to how you like work, you make big goals and work backwards, whereas I just don't operate that way. It's like I make the next right step and see where it takes me.
And if I've learned one thing about business and life, no one has it figured out. I've met people who are like polar opposite me, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I kind of just one day was like, I'm gonna do this, and I didn't think more than 3 months ahead, and look at where I am now." And I'm like, "You didn't plan any of that?" And they're like, "Nope." I was like, "Well, I don't know if I should stop planning." Yeah, so I've just come to the determination. Everyone kind of feels out, vibes out what's like the best route for them to take. Because I mean, I think that's, yeah,
We all do it differently. It all works differently for everyone.
yeah, I think people do it differently, and I think just understanding that it's okay for people to do those things differently. I think that's, and I think you could probably feel this too. And maybe this is projecting, but I know I've met so many older farmers, and this is something that the ag industry in general I think has struggled with. It's like, hey, you do things my way because they work. You
Mm-hmm.
don't do things a new way because we don't know if they work, and that's like polar opposite. Like I'm the type of person who's like, you know what, I like to follow what's worked, but it's almost like sometimes you just have to do something. It's like, hey, like if we, I'm sure you've experienced this. Like if we do it the same way for the rest of our lives, well, the people who tried new things and figured out it worked are going to beat us to the punch every time, because they're going to keep iterating. And it sounds like your family's pretty good at that. It's like, hey, you know what? We see chickens. We should take a risk on that. We need to, it's like, hey, you know what? It doesn't make sense given our geographic location compared to everyone else, but it's like, hey, this is something that we think is a good idea. And I've met so many people. It's like, yeah, we don't have a 5-year plan for this, but we have a rough idea, and we think this is the next step. And so, yeah.
Yeah, how do you value traditions but embrace new ideas at the same time? Because working with my dad, there's a lot of traditions that we do and we do well,
Mm-hmm.
or just my family in general. Like we have the tradition of memory preservation, and so I want to continue that. That's the same with a lot of things that we do. We're
Mm-hmm.
really good at traditions, but I think my brother and I are really good at asking the why behind things, like why do we do this? And then then it makes my dad or uncles think of like, well, why do we do this? Well, because
Mm-hmm.
we've always done it. And then evaluate, is this working well? Should we continue it, or is there ways to update or adjust things? And so how just also being intentional about knowing what those traditions are, like choosing our traditions, why are they traditions, and what are things that maybe we can improve on. Yeah, raising chickens is absolutely no tradition in our family, but my parents value family, right? So by valuing family, they wanted to make a way that a child could come home back to the operation, and it's uncomfortable to sign their name at on a line for a loan to build chicken barns, but it lines up with the tradition of family. And
Mm-hmm.
so it worked, right? I got to come home, and they also, the advantage of working with an integrator is that we get paid very regularly, right? We will know that we won't get rich off of raising chickens, but we also hopefully won't go broke. Whereas, raising crops or cattle, you can make a lot of money some years, but you can also lose a lot of money really, really quick. And so we ride those waves, and that's why we value diversity, right? That's another thing that we value, is to diversify our operation, because generally when you're making money off of crops, you probably aren't thriving off cattle, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same way, like I I value diversification. And so even off the farm, I do some photography work and now doing some contract work, or, joining the legacy interviews company. That's diversifying my time. That's going to diversify the people that I spend time around. My financial resources, like I diversify my financial resources, things like that too. And
Hmm.
so how can you, yeah, going back to, we value these traditions, but what are ways that we can make things work within those lines?
Wow, that's awesome. I do have to get going soon. I hate that being the reason I have to cut off podcasts, but I've got to go to Kansas City in a few minutes. Um, I was probably what drives you? That's probably my final question is like, what is your drive to keep doing what you're doing, or why you wake up every day to keep doing your, like you clearly love your family, you love your job, you like diversify, you're still clearly at the farm. Like what's driving you on a regular basis to go back to work even on those hard days? What is like, I wake up in the morning and I want to do this even if I don't want to today?
I love the lifestyle that farming lends us, right? So we put in some really long, hard hours or seasons where we push hard. But then, winter, or sometimes in the middle of like just there's seasons where maybe things are a little bit slower. I love the routines of the seasons. I love the daily routine of, I wake up every day and I go do chores. There's mundane in that, but I've learned that even in the mundane, that's where my best ideas come from. And so I love that I get to watch it sounds so cliche. And I've also learned that I romanticize my life a little bit, because if I'm not enjoying the mundaneness, then I'm going to be miserable real quick.
Hmm.
So in the mundaneness, I love that I get to watch the sunrise, because not everyone gets to see that. I love cattle at the bunk. Uh, Putting feed in the feed bunk and watching cattle come up and eat in a line like that. I've seen that my whole life and I still love it, right?
Hmm.
I love problem solving in the chicken barns. I love that when I have an opportunity off the farm come up, my parents are supportive of that, because they do value what we do off the farm too.
Hmm.
So just the lifestyle in general is what motivates me, because sure, I could go make more money working for someone else, or if I just love feeding cattle, I could go work at a feedlot and feed cattle all day. But I love the diversity of my life, and the lifestyle of, on hard days we work hard and I like the satisfaction of that, but on other days we can embrace whatever else is happening. I love that I'm flexible, that I can go to town and I help out, and volunteer in some ways. Like I can do things in the middle of the day that other people my age maybe not be able to. So
Hmm.
that was a lot of over romanticization, but in my book, it's not, because I really do love just in general, the lifestyle, and the seasonal rotations that I get to be a part of.
Sweet. That's awesome. Well, where can people find you?
I'm all over social media at It's Hannah Borg. I'm pretty active on my Instagram stories. I just, post the feel good farm photos. I love it's a lot of cattle and my dog, I suppose. Or just, in general, I just love pictures and photography. And so I'm also doing some more photography off the farm. And so my favorite is lifestyle sessions for family farms and ranches. In those history books that I was looking through, my favorite photos are of my families working together. And
Hmm.
there's not a lot of those photos. And so I want to be able to do that for other family farmers as well. So I love coming out, riding in the combine, or just being in the field. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can find me on social media at It's Hannah Borg. I'd love to capture your family just doing real life, everyday things.
Yeah. Yeah. I will put all those links in the description of the podcast episode. But thank you for your time, Hannah. I really appreciate it. We've been following each other on Instagram for quite a while now. So it's nice to
Yeah,
actually finally talk to you. So one day I'll probably make it out and I'll get to see your feedlot and meet the rest of your family because that sounds fun. I don't know
yeah,
when
I would
that'll
love
be because, I'm busy all the time. But I really do appreciate you coming on. Once again, guys, you can find all of her info in the description of this episode. Thanks for listening. I hope you guys have an awesome week.
that. Thanks.